afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending this another No House of Real Estate podcast. I'm Kevin Wurgler with eXp Realty, and I got my trusty co-host, Mr. Mike Stensrud. Mike, how's it going, brother?
Could be better, Kevin. Happy Friday, and happy Friday, Sheila. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah,
Thanks, Kevin.
You bet. We're going to have a little talk today about the 1031 exchange, and we've got an expert on the panel today. And her name is Sheila Long. And Sheila, give us a little background about yourself and let us know what you do there with a 1031 exchange.
Great. Yeah, I'm what's called a qualified intermediary, or the company that I work for. And I'm actually a certified exchange specialist. So I actually teach this course to other realtors, as well as I've done some CPA and attorney board associations. So I really value education and try to make the process easier for the taxpayer to understand.
So why did you pick 1031 to be an expert in it, or VP?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I've been in this industry now for, I shouldn't age myself, but for about 2.5 decades now. And I've always found that the investment side of real estate has been interesting. I also come from a background of taxes. I'm really glad that I'm not there live with you guys in the studio, so you can't hold me hostage. But my mom works for the IRS, so I've been known to ask her questions. And taxes have always been something that have been interesting to me on ways that we can defer those versus having to shell it out of our pocket. So wealth growing with our own assets is what I like.
Okay. Mike, what you got there, brother?
Well, I've been to a couple 1031 exchanges, and I learn something every time. So just for our listeners, just so they get familiar, what is a 1031 exchange? We can start with that.
Yes, so that's a tax code that allows us taxpayers to protect our equity and defer the gain, to not pay capital gains tax on our equity, so long as when we're selling that investment property, we exchange into new replacement property. That'll allow us, so not just selling and buying, okay? It's not just a sale and a buy. There has to be an exchange with a qualified intermediary set up in advance to protect that equity.
Oh, so what is that qualified intermediary? What is that? How's that work?
It's a third party. So it's somebody that's not related to a taxpayer or someone they've done business with in the last 2 years. So, and one of us that we're trying to do our own sale and exchange, we couldn't use, say, our attorney or a family member to hold our funds. So qualified intermediary is an unrelated third party that gets involved and follows the safe harbor rules of Section 1031.
And are they a bank?
No, we're not a bank. There are some banks that access QIs out there, but we are actually as you, some of you may know, right? Those two in the room here, we're Old Republic Exchange. And so we are sister companies with Old Republic Title and Home Protection, and all under the parent company, Old Republic Insurance. And so we're holding those funds and following the safe harbor rules. So we're not a bank. We're not out there investing the funds for them. We're keeping them for the taxpayer to make sure that they can complete that exchange.
Good. Thanks for that explanation. Kevin?
Hey, so as a realtor, I've got a client that calls me up and says that they have a property in Oregon and they're going to be selling it, but they want to do a 1031 here in Arizona. So what do I need to do as a realtor to help my client out? Can we just go out and look for property, or what do we have to do to get it all started down here?
Great question. So first off, now you mentioned your client was going from Oregon to Arizona. This is a great way to know, this is something good for all listeners, that you can actually cross state lines, and you could do the 1031 exchange in any state and most U.S. territories. Okay. So you can go Oregon to Arizona, Nevada to Florida to Virgin Islands, even Guam. All right. So what do you need to do? Well, the best thing I can say for any listener that's in here considering doing a 1031 exchange, to make sure they get their qualified intermediary involved early on and before they sell that Oregon property. So the exchange has to be set up. Okay, Kevin, this is the most important thing. In order for a taxpayer to qualify for a 1031 exchange, they have to set the exchange up in advance. So they can't let that property in Oregon close and the funds hit their hot little hands or their account, and then they say, hey, Kevin, I'm exchanging, show me property. So the best thing for all of you listening in here is make sure you're with a qualified intermediary early on. And that way, so Kevin, when you're showing him property on this side, you too can be in touch with a qualified intermediary if needed, or at least to get proof of funds, right? So that you know you can show an offer with some backing financially.
Yeah. So do they have to have an intermediary up there in Oregon and down here, or can you do both?
One intermediary can act as both. So they wouldn't do one. It was not working from like one intermediary in Oregon to Arizona. So say that you said, oh, Sheila, I've got a client that's selling in Oregon and they're buying in Arizona. I could help out. All right. So we can help out nationwide in most states.
Okay. And I know also that, so they put their house on the market up there and they want to find a property down here. There's some timelines and everything that has to be involved in doing all this too. So what's the timeline that they need to find a house down here and close on one and et cetera?
Yeah, so that's what's going to keep a taxpayer up at night. Let me tell you, this timeline is very tight. There's an exchange period of 180 days, and within that exchange period is a tight little identification window of 45 calendar days.
Mm-hmm.
This means that the taxpayer has to identify a replacement property from the time they close. So remember, they've set the exchange up already, right? Kevin, your client, and I have been working together. They set the exchange up. They now have day closing is day 0. They then have 45 calendar days to identify, and they must close on any of the properties identified within a 180-day exchange period.
Okay. So we got to get started right away on that 45 days, because it could take a few days to find a property. And then, but once we get under contract, then they still have 180 days to close on that property.
Total. Yeah. So they've got the 45 within the 180.
Oh,
But
okay.
here's a good tip for you. So say that particular client calls you and says, Kevin, I want you to start showing properties. My Oregon relinquished property is closing in 2 weeks. Are you able to do that? Absolutely. Go make offers today if you want to. I always tell everyone, as long as you are able to find a seller that is willing to accept the contingency that your relinquished property is closing in weeks or months or whenever that is set to close, you can certainly write offers before the relinquished property has closed. And then we can close that as soon as day 0, day 1, up to day 180 within that exchange period.
Yeah. So basically, if they got their home under contract up there, kind of without really looking at the 1031 exchange, we write a contract down here. And again, it's still contingent on theirs closing in Oregon. And then the 1031 will come up into play once they get down after they're closed. They've already contacted you. So everybody knows that it's 1031 exchange.
Yeah, so there's a contingency, definitely. So obviously the other party needs to be aware of this. This is important, okay? The other party, the seller of the replacement property, the buyer involved in the relinquished property, all other parties involved need to be aware that there's a 1031 exchange.
Okay, perfect. What do you got there, Big Mike?
Well, you had mentioned, Sheila, about taxes. So what is the impact of capital gains tax on 1031 exchange?
So for those of you listening in, we're a qualified intermediary, not a CPA. All right. So make sure you don't take anything that we're saying as tax advice. And that's so important that we tell you, taxpayers, that you don't just want to rely on the qualified intermediary, right? Because with a 1031 exchange and the capital gains, Mike, they are really based per taxpayer. So as well as what state do they live in? So we're all taxed on the federal, we're taxed on the state, some states, right? Not all states have state tax. We're taxed on if we're in a higher income bracket, or we're taxed on depreciation recapture. So those taxes can very much range on the federal level from 0 to 20%. And rarely will they ever fall in that 0%. It depends on where their income and their gain is. Plus the state, as I mentioned, is surtax on income and depreciation. So it really is something that's specific to each taxpayer, and I have to be careful with that.
Gotcha. I totally understand. Let me ask you, you probably got lots of stories, right? So what are the most common pitfalls, or why do 1031 exchanges fail?
Yeah, I guess I would say really making sure that you listeners know, start the process early. All right. Because if you can imagine how quickly 45 days
Yeah.
starts and comes, it's one of those areas where I do see, Mike, the most successful taxpayers in an exchange are those that are getting with, say, Kevin from, they're selling in Oregon and they're getting with Kevin on the buy side early on, right? Those that wait till the end, they're like, well, I don't really want to make offers yet. I'm sort of just waiting to see. And oh, I have a debt I have to replace on the replacement property. So they start waiting. And then they don't talk to their lender partners to make sure they're pre-approved for the value they might want. And they haven't
Mm.
gotten their qualified intermediary and they haven't talked to their tax professional. And so those exchanges that I see that fail are those that wait till the end. Okay. That's typically one of the hazards to warn everyone on. Okay. And secondly, I also find where those that are identifying replacement property will fail to let their qualified intermediary know, hey, listen, I'm filling out my identification notice of the properties I'm going to buy. Or they simply, like I said, forget to do that. And one of the best things I can tell you, Kevin, as a realtor, is to make sure you put in there for that client of ours in the scenario, the one from Oregon, right? Or out of state, wherever they are, to put in there in an addendum or in the offer, buyer intends to purchase this through a 1031 exchange. That
Mm.
one line right there has saved transactions. And I've had taxpayers where they've identified, they forgot day 45 came along, day 46, they forgot to cancel their ID notice and they were almost set to have some holding restrictions of their funds. And a realtor came to the rescue because they'd written a contract that was accepted, written, and provided to the seller with the verbiage buyer intends to do a 1031 exchange.
Mhm.
Okay, that saved it. So those are the top two, I'd say, Mike,
Yeah.
that really are some potential things that could get in the way.
And I'm
Yeah, I
assuming
think
those timelines, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. I'm assuming those timelines, those are pretty strict, right?
They are, unless there's a natural declared disaster, there are no extensions granted.
That's
yeah, I
it.
think we have an additional clause addendum or something, but my I shouldn't say I think because my TC, my lovely wife Annette, she handles all that, so she would know. But additional clause addendum stating that it's a 1031 exchange. Um,
Yeah. And don't just rely on checking that box. I should tell you, you listening in here, because it still says who checked the box. Was it the seller? Was it the buyer? So
Mm.
really buttoning that up on the buy side as a qualified intermediary across the industry. A lot of us are now starting to warn taxpayers, put in their buyer intends to purchase this through a 1031.
yeah,
That's a really big deal in case that timeline comes along and they forgot to identify and they've got a contract that's within that window.
yeah. Now I've also heard the word like properties. Does it have to be the same price what they sold it as, or does it have to have two bathrooms and a den and a den, or the same square footage? What does like properties mean?
Yeah, like kind is a very misunderstood term. And like kind simply means, get this, Kevin, any real estate held for investment for another. So a taxpayer can come from out of state selling raw land and come over to this side and buy a single family residential rental. They can take commercial for multifamily, industrial for a boat storage warehouse on the marina. Anything held for investment qualifies. Okay, that's what like kind really means. It doesn't mean same make and model, same square footage,
Mm,
residential for residential. It simply
mm,
means any real property held for investment. This gives great opportunity for listeners.
wow. Yeah, that's kind of interesting because I always were kind of going out there. Well, what's your square footage up there? What's your house up there? Does it have a pool? Doesn't it have a pool? And I've always gone real estate, residential with residential. I never haven't been involved in residential up there, and he wants to buy land down here or something like that. So that's very interesting. That's good advice. What do you think there, Mike?
Yeah, I've heard that too. Like commercial, I didn't realize they're all seen the same. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, that like
Oh.
kind of areas where even our own tax professionals make mistakes. And that's one of those areas where I have joined and jumped into CPA meetings. I love being able to meet with CPAs because I can pick their brain and
Mm,
ask them questions, and then they'll pick my brain about the 1031, because a lot of our CPAs actually focus on understanding a broad range of all the tax rules, right? What we can get away with on accounting, what we can't, the changes from the last administration, potential changes from the next one. All right. They don't focus on every tax code. And this 1031 is what qualified intermediaries focus on, one, right? Section 1031. And that like kind really gets some of our own tax professionals mixed up, because you would think,
mm,
right, Mike?
yeah.
Well, I'm selling residential, I should buy residential again. No, you just can't go buy your primary home or personal
Mm,
property, right? You can't go sell an investment property and then go and buy a boat or go and buy
gotcha.
your primary home. It must
Yeah.
be investment real property to real property.
Mm.
So are
And
there very many? Let's just talk about the qualified intermediaries. Are there a lot of them out there? If I'm going to go choose one, what do I look for? Are you
Now,
certified?
yeah, it's not a regulated industry, so you really do have to make sure you are asking the right questions. What insurance coverage do you carry? What bond coverage, errors and omissions? What happens to my funds to make sure that they're protected? Because as it's not a regulated industry, anyone really could hold those funds. And what happens to
Hmm,
those funds if something were to happen to that third party holding them? That's the biggest thing. And that's one of the areas a lot of taxpayers don't realize, right? If something were to happen to the individual, right, or the smaller firm holding the funds, and something was done wrong or mismanaged, not by any malicious intent, but in the fact that maybe something just happened, or the firm manager passed away. We don't want to be morbid, but what if
yeah.
something happened? Well, guess what? Now the taxpayers out their money until they figure out how to get that back. They're out the property they just sold. And come tax time, the IRS still sees it as a failed exchange and taxes are due.
Hmm.
So making
Okay.
sure you're using a company that has that protection and that backing is really important for taxpayers to perform their own due diligence and be aware of this.
Gotcha. Thank you, Kevin.
couple more questions here. How about markets? Does the market have anything to do with it? If it's a good market in Oregon or a good market down here, does that have anything to do with the 1031 exchange?
You would be surprised that even as we saw that our rates were going up and down and things were not, certain on where that was going to go, and maybe it affected the first time home buyers, what hasn't changed is capital gains. What's not going away is the taxes due on the equity earned. So as the market was going up and down, as qualified intermediaries, we were still seeing a movement within our economy. And that's a big deal. That's sort of where that's going. So as long as capital gains are around, then 1031 exchanges, and as long as those are still staying in place, we're still moving.
Yeah. Do you work with a lot of realtors in this, or is it more that you work with just individuals that are doing a 1031 exchange?
Well, I personally like to consider myself an educator, and so I work with all. So as a QI, we work with realtors, we work and answer questions for the taxpayer's lender if they have questions, their CPA, their legal advisors, and then we obtain everything we need from the closing title company or escrow or closing attorney, whichever state they're in. And so we are definitely communicating with all parties to make sure, and hand holding the taxpayer that's trying to do the exchange.
Yeah, excellent.
And are you? I want to just look at the changes. Obviously, you know the changes that are going through the real estate industry this year, right? So, does the future? Does it affect 1031 exchanges? And even if it doesn't, are there any things that you're looking at for the future that might affect the way that their 1031s are structured? Just in general,
Yeah.
does the
So
future look bright?
Yeah, so the 1031 exchange is always going to be threatened, as it looks like a valuable tax tool to maybe chop, to cap, to change, right? Capital gains,
Hmm.
increasing them, right? Things like that. It's always looked at. So there's always the fear that is the 1031 exchange going to go away. So, right as it stands right now, it's preserved. Always change can happen with any new administration. So we will see, right? That crystal ball, if I had that, I'd be doing really well. And so, but with that, as some changes that I can tell you, tell taxpayers listening in, is that there are allowable expenses in a 1031 exchange. Again, I want you to bring in your CPAs into this area, and this is not considered tax advice. I always like to point that out. Okay, so don't just say, "Well, I heard it on the internet," right?
Right, right.
The internet always tells the truth, but really, in understanding allowable expenses that lower that, and you know what, Kevin, actually, I heard you say something about this equal or greater, right? Do you have to sell for a certain number and buy again for that same number? Yes, and it's equal or greater in value, less closing costs, less allowable expenses. Okay. Some of those expenses are escrow, title fees, recording fees, if their city or county has those. Okay. Transfer tax in those areas. And get this, real estate compensation, okay, on both sides. So those are a big deal, that it's really important that as the changes are coming that are going around, I'm letting taxpayers know, bring your CPA in, make sure you understand these are allowable expenses. Therefore, you can certainly make sure you have good representation on the acquisition side as well, not just the listing side.
It's rewarding to see that everybody's happy, everybody's enjoying their new property, moving away, going back home to visit the kids. What's rewarding about your job on a 1031 exchange side of it?
Yeah. So I feel that even though I'm not giving tax advice, I'm still helping those potential exchangers, those taxpayers, find ways to really wealth grow, to keep these funds that might have been used in tax dollars into something that continues to grow for them. I really find a lot of value in being able to help taxpayers like that. I mentioned early on, right? Like my mom has always been in a government position. I grew up watching her volunteer her time, helping senior citizens doing their taxes, right? She'd volunteer her time to help those that didn't understand it every Saturday around tax season. And I always felt like she had the value of wanting to help others. And so even though here I am as a qualified intermediary doing this, it still gives me that joy to know that they're getting their questions answered from a reliable source, not just finding it and searching it through like I mentioned, the internet.
Yeah. Well, very good. Thanks. Mike, what you got there for final?
No, I was just going to say, and I would add that I know that you've helped a lot of real estate agents in the process, because the more they know, then they can offer these services, right? And
Yes.
yeah, that's a good thing. So for everyone, because if we don't know anything, we're not going to be able to help, and we just turn it over to experts like you, and everyone hopefully can win. So thank you for all the time. I learned a ton. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Sheila. We appreciate it. And that was Sheila Long with Old Republic 1031 Exchange. And she's the VP regional manager here in this area. So if you're looking for a tax 1031 person, either call Mike or myself. We'd be more than happy to get you in contact with Sheila. Yeah, happy Labor Day, everybody. We appreciate it. Thank you so much.